test.
Hello, good afternoon everybody. We're very sorry to keep you waiting. As you'll hear today, there wasn't one decision that was made, so we will go through it. I will hand over straight away to Seb. I think you know who the other two people are, so I'm not going to introduce them. Once they have had have talked through, we'll then open the floor to Q&A. Thank you.
Jackie, thank you very much, and I'm sorry the nature of the day inevitably meant that I'm afraid you were kept waiting. Our morning was spent actually discussing the corporate structure, the governance review, which we return to later on in the year. Rune Andersen, the independent chairperson of the IAAF task force, which is monitoring the verification process, delivered a report which made 4 separate unanimous recommendations to the Council, and he will take you through those recommendations shortly. So, although good progress has been made, the IAAF Council was unanimous that RUSAF had not met the reinstatement conditions and that Russian athletes could not credibly return to international competition without undermining the confidence of their competitors and the public. As a result, RUSAF has not been reinstated to membership of the IAAF at this stage. The second recommendation is that while RUSAF remains suspended, no other representatives of RUSAF, i.e. officials, athlete support personnel, should take part in international competition or in the affairs of the IAAF. Rune.
So the task force that has been tasked to deal with reinstatement of RUSAF were given terms of reference for the IAAF task force in November last year, given a number of verification criteria and reinstatement conditions. And under these reinstatement conditions, RUSAF must show that there is now a culture of zero tolerance towards doping in Russian athletics, and that RUSADA, which is the national anti-doping agency in Russia, and the public authorities in Russia working in cooperation have created an anti-doping infrastructure that is effective in detecting and deterring cheats, and that therefore provides assurance and protection to clean athletes both inside and outside of Russia. Although there has been significant progress towards satisfaction of the verification criteria, several important verification criteria have not been fully satisfied. In particular, the deep-seated culture of tolerance, or worse, for doping that got RUSAF suspended in the first place appears not to have been changed materially to date. The head coach of the Russian athletic team and many of the athletes on that team appear unwilling to acknowledge the nature and extent of the doping problem in Russian athletics, and certain athletes and coaches appear willing to ignore the doping rules. A strong and effective anti-doping infrastructure capable of detecting and deterring doping has still not been created. Efforts to test athletes in Russia have continued to encounter serious obstacles and difficulties. RUSAF appears unable to enforce all doping bans, and RUSADA is reportedly at least 18 to 24 months away from returning to full operational compliance with the World Anti-Doping Code. The task force does consider, however, that if there are individual athletes who can clearly and convincingly show that they are not tainted by the Russian system because they have been outside the country or subject to other strong anti-doping systems, including effective drug testing, then there should be a process through which they can apply for permission to compete in international competition, not for Russia, but as a neutral athlete. Therefore, the task force separately proposed that Council make a rule change to that effect, and that was adopted today. And the fourth recommendation is that any individual athlete who has made an extraordinary contribution to the fight against doping in sport should also be able to apply for such permission. In particular, Yulia Stepanova's case should be considered favorably. This was adopted unanimously by the Council.
So the full report that went to Council will be on the website in about 20 minutes. I know you've only got a summary, I'm sorry it's late. But if you have got questions, please raise your hand, tell us where you're from, and then we'll answer as many questions as we can in the time we've got. Yes, we'll start with Kelso, we'll go along that row. Paul? Yep.
Paul Kelso from...
Can you do the microphone? Sorry.
Paul Kelso from Sky News. Could you tell me what message you hope this sends about how serious your sport is about cleaning up, given that it appears there is a backdoor here for some Russian athletes to appear in Rio de Janeiro?
I think it sends a very, very powerful message. I think it sends a very powerful message to athletes that are in systems that are insecure or maybe actually making choices themselves. I think it sends a very, very strong message from the IAAF that this is a non-negotiable proposition. And the rule change 22.1, I think, to our competition code today was very clear that it is possible that athletes that, as Rune said, are not tainted under the Russian system but are in systems that are effective anti-doping programs, that the Doping Review Board, which we have asked to look at those individual cases, will make an assessment. But this is not, the fundamental proposition here is very, very simple. The Russian Federation remains suspended, and the rule change looks at the potential for athletes that are outside of that system to potentially return to international competition, but once reviewed by our Doping Review Board.
Rune, do you want to add to that? No? Are you right? Okay, sorry, yes, lady here at the front.
Nice to meet you. My name is Olga Skabeva. I'm from Russian State Television. And my question is, how do you think, is it really honest when some athletes dope to punish all Russian team? How do you think, is it fair, is it honest, and is it really okay for world's wild sport? And the second question is, can we be sure that there is no politics in this, your decision? Because we're really pity about everything you have said just now. Thanks a lot.
First of all, the council is made up of 26, 27 people from all four corners of the globe. The decision was unanimous. Politics was not playing a part in that room today. The criteria that was established at the time of the provisional suspension was very clear. It was unambiguous. And the work of the task force has continued in an independent way, and the recommendations that were made to the council today were accepted unanimously. Secondly, the statement that we've made today is a very clear indication that over the long haul, our responsibility is to protect clean athletes. And that is what this says. And I think there is a very important concept here, and this is, was made very clear by Rune and the task force today, that in a system that has so badly failed the athletes in Russia, that it is extremely difficult to define or have any presumption that athletes are in a safe and secure enough system for us to conclude that they are eligible for international competition. And that was the challenge of the discussion today, but it was the recommendation that was fully and unanimously supported.
Okay. Sorry, can we just, we'll come back. We will, no, we'll come back to those questions. So yes, gentlemen, thank you.
I think you should make it, but you can add to that.
I'm Michael Reinsch, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung in Germany. This goes to the two of you. Seb, how do you define clean athletes, and how do you expect to find them, and how many do you expect to find? And the other is to Rune. With your experience in anti-doping now and your youngest experience now, do you think it's time for an general overhaul of anti-doping measures in the sense of countries controlling each other, not giving the responsibility to the anti-doping agencies of one country to control its own athletes?
Yeah, I think you can take that.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I think your last question is a very interesting one, and I've been working on trying to look at anti-doping systems around the world. WADA is now dealing with this in a very strict fashion through the code compliance system. Of course, we are talking about one country and one sport, because there was an investigation ongoing into Russian athletics. So that is why this is dealt with, and IAAF took action when it was recommended by WADA that IAAF took action. But of course, this is a huge issue that needs to be dealt with by the appropriate organizations. which means that WADA, international federations, national anti-doping organizations, and governments needs to step up their fight against doping and coordinate that fight against doping. On the question on clean athletes, it's a difficult one. What we have been saying in the task force is that because the system in Russia has been tainted by doping from top level and down, we cannot trust that what we call and people might call clean athletes really are clean. It's a difficult task, but the systematic doping that has been ongoing in Russia, it's difficult to pick the clean athletes. And as you know, 1 or 2 or 5 or 100 negative tests does not mean that an athlete is clean. History has shown that that is not the case. What we're saying on the issue of those who might get through the crack, the very tiny crack in the door, is that they have to be subject to a reliable drug testing regime outside of Russia. Yeah. And that is important in order to safeguard the other athletes, because we're talking about clean athletes under a regime, potential clean athletes under a regime. But what about the other clean athletes that had been cheated by athletes under such a regime? I think that's something that one wants to think about. We need to protect all the clean athletes, not only one or some from one country.
Thank you. We've got a gentleman here, then we're going to across here, and then to Mr. Sepp out at the back.
Mark Trevelyan of Reuters in the front row, Lord Coe. Lord Coe, does this decision definitively mean that there will be no Russia track and field team in the Olympic Games in Rio, or can you conceive of any circumstances whereby the IOC meeting in 4 days' time might somehow take a different view to what you've decided today?
Well, I think we need to be clear here. The eligibility of athletes to compete in international competition is entirely a matter for the IAAF. I will be attending the Olympic Summit in a few days' time to represent my sport as I've done on similar occasions. So I'm not prejudging any conversation or deliberations, but it is a very clear proposition that the eligibility for athletes to compete internationally sits and lies with the IAAF.
Thank you.
David Walsh from the Sunday Times. Runain said, do you accept that the culture that underpinned this doping in Russia goes back decades? That's the first part of the question. The second part would be, if you accept that it's very deep-rooted, do you not think that what we've seen also represents kind of confirmation that the anti-doping system we had in place just didn't work, that WADA didn't do its job as well as it could have done it, and that the IAAF and its anti-doping system didn't do its job nearly as well as it should have?
Runain, do you want to?
Thank you. Well, I think that the decades of a doping regime in Russia and the Soviet Union is quite clear. And I don't think anybody denies that. In conversations with Minister Mutko, he has admitted that they have inherited a doping culture from the Soviet Union. Whether there has been done enough work to root out doping in Russia, well, I of course not, because it's still an issue in Russia. So it's an easy answer to say there hasn't been done enough to do that. Has there been done some work that is of considerable amount? Yes, of course. I mean, many have seen that there are issues with Russian sport and with doping, and many has been contributing to that. But at the same time, it's a difficult environment to work in when there are systematic and systemic doping rooted in many parts of the society.
So, did you want to add anything? No?
Oh, I can, yes. I mean, very briefly. I mean, look, you know, I have been an international competitor. My career spanned a good chunk of the 70s, most of the 80s. In fact, all the 80s. You know, we know that doping has been a global problem for many, many decades. The IAAF, and I'm very proud to say this, actually were the pioneering partners with the athlete biological passport. We were the first to accredit laboratories. We were the first to actually make many of the moves around out of competition, in competition, independent testing. My own report back in the late 80s to government created that template itself. So this is something that you are right in one assessment, and that is that we do need to redouble our efforts to be more integrated across this whole landscape and make sure that we are operating at every possible opportunity optimally. And that is, we will continue and redouble our efforts with WADA, working with national anti-doping agencies for which we do not actually have responsibility for, and maintaining our anti-doping programs around the world, which in large part I do actually believe have been effective. But this is not denial. It is to say, yes, there are things that we can do and we're doing now to make sure that that return journey to the safety and security of clean athletes is given extra horsepower.
Thank you, Mr. Seppelt. We'll come back on this side.
Hi, Giuseppe, German television. I have two questions. The first one is, I read in your executive summary a very interesting quote. There are detailed allegations, which are already partly substantiated, that the Ministry of Sport, far from supporting the anti-doping effort, has in fact orchestrated systemic doping and the covering up of adverse analytical findings. Can you say what that means in detail? And the second question is, you refer to Yulia Stepanova, the whistleblower. Does that mean that she will be allowed and she will be, if she wants, to compete in Rio at the Olympics?
Rune? Yeah.
So the quote that you referred to in the press release refers to Richard McLaren, who is now investigating the report in the New York Times that there was systemic doping in Russia. He has been mandated by WADA to do this, and we have been informed by McLaren that tests being sent to the Russian lab were filtered so that the appropriate tests would not go through if the athletes that they had chosen were not the ones that they wanted to test positive for. And this was a collaboration between the ministry and the laboratory. This will be further looked into by McLaren in his report, which he will deliver on the 15th of July. But we have been given the opportunity to include that in our report, as this was important information for us to take into consideration in corroborating evidence that we have been doing all along.
And then Stepanova, Rio?
Well, I cannot say that she will compete in Rio, because that's not up to the task force. Our recommendation that was adopted by the IAAF Council was that they will look favorable into the possibility for her to do so. There is a rule change in that respect, and you will see that when you get all the postings on the website, so that she would be allowed, if she meets the criteria, that a specific committee within IAAF will consider after her apply for reinstatement or for competing in the Olympic Games. or any other competition, international competition.
Okay, yes, we'll go to this side.
It's Richard Conway from BBC. Lord Coe, you said today that politics played no part in the Council's decision. Is that your message to Thomas Bach and to the IOC now, to respect the decision of the IAAF and not to play politics themselves with this when they discuss it next week? And secondly, the chairman of the House of Commons Culture, Media and Sport Committee said today it was almost certain that he would ask you to return to the committee to give evidence in light of the claims of what you knew and when about Russian doping cover-up allegations. Is that something that you will accept? Will you return? And do you accept that you misled Parliament?
Yes, sorry. No, I don't have a message for the IOC here. I will be attending the summit on Tuesday to represent my sport as I have on previous occasions. The decision that the Council took today off the recommendation, the 4 recommendations from the task force, was unanimous, and I will obviously with interest attend that conference, that discussion, but I do make the point that the eligibility criteria for any competing athlete at international level is a matter for the IAAF, which of course the IOC would fully recognise, given that it is an organisation that also represents the interests of international federations. Oh, and Jesse Norman, yes, I spoke to Jesse Norman a couple of days ago, and we talked about at some stage between autumn and the end of the year, returning to the Select Committee to talk about the progress that we've made both in the reform agenda at the IAAF, the changes we have made to, or we are making to our anti-doping programs, particularly around the implementation of an independent integrity unit. The work we have agreed and green-lighted again today around the appointment of an ethical compliance officer and the ethical compliance unit and the whole-scale rewriting of our constitution. There is a mountainous amount of work that has taken place, and our whole morning actually was spent drilling through that with workshops yesterday. So I'm very happy to return to the Select Committee to report on that progress.
Okay, Mark, and then we'll go to the middle row.
En français, comme d'habitude. In French as usual, official language. Est-il possible... C'est bon? Ok. Est-il possible d'avoir des détails sur le mode de qualification individuelle des athlètes? Autrement dit, est-ce que c'est eux qui doivent faire la demande? Est-ce que c'est vous qui ferez un tri? Est-ce que la décision sera prise rapidement? Quelques détails complémentaires factuels.
Well, the recommendation from the task force is that a committee within IAAF will deal with this. As mentioned before, the crack in the door or the opening to apply for this is quite narrow. So there won't be many athletes that will manage to get through the crack of that door, because it's clearly they have to demonstrate that they have been subject to a credible anti-doping control system and that they are not tainted by the system in Russia.
Okay, so Martin Ziegler and then Owen, Martha.
So it's Martin Ziegler from The Times. So yeah, two questions. One, can you guarantee that no Russian athletes will be competing in Rio, no Russian track and field athletes will be competing in Rio under the Russian flag? That's the first question.
We can.
Mm-hmm. And the second is, there's been some sort of confusion over... There's a report from in the Evening Standard from saying Dave Bedford that he spoke to you before he sent the email to which you've responded, that he spoke to you and said that he'd had a conversation with you before he sent the email. Is it possible to try and clarify exactly what happened between you and Dave Bedford in this email that was sent with this allegations about Russian doping?
Yep. Who wants to do the flag?
You do the flag, yeah.
Rio?
Well, you can never guarantee when you're living in a world of lawyers who might appeal cases to CAS. So there is no guarantee for anything, but the rule change that we recommended and that was adopted states very clearly that those who falls outside of this scope will have to be under the will not be under the Russian flag and will be under a neutral competition system.
Yes, David Bedford did speak to me, I think from memory at the time of the European Championships or around that time in Zurich. He then talked about rumours and allegations, but no details, and then forwarded me the email, which I then forwarded to Michael Beloff at the Ethics Committee.
Okay, Owen, and then Martha.
Owen Gibson from The Guardian. Just one quick follow-up to Martin's question and then a separate one, if I may. Just to follow up on this email and what Dave Bedford said and so on. Did he tell you the detail of what was in that attachment when you had the telephone conversation? What exactly did he refer to? And my second question is, would it not have been perhaps wiser to set down a blanket ban on Russian athletes rather than leaving this crack in the door? Does it not risk being unambiguous, sending an unambiguous message?
Okay.
I'm sorry, could you just repeat the first question? I was
Yes, of course. I was just interested
detailing your second one, I'm sorry.
Of course. I was just interested in what it was that you and Dave Bedford said to one another, whether he was specific about the allegations regarding Lilia Shubakova or whether it was just...
No, he wasn't specific, and I don't remember, I don't recollect it being a telephone conversation. I think we met probably at an athletics event.
The easiest way would have been to blanket say Rusev will not be reinstated and there are no exceptions. That would have been the easy way. We have been advised by outside counsel that in order for this to stand up to the proportionality rule, if you wish, then there should be a way out so that when or if this is challenged in court, we have the possibility of saying, well, look, this is a possibility for those who can demonstrate, as I said, to be outside of the systemic doping system and that have been undergoing severe anti-doping controls under a credible anti-doping system abroad.
Okay, Martha.
Hello, Martha Kellner from the Daily Mail. Seb, another question about the email/telephone conversation with Dave Bedford. I just wondered why you wouldn't ask about the details. Was it because you felt like it would be a conflict of interest if you asked, or?
No, it's very simple. As was the case and has always been the case, I have hundreds of conversations with people in athletics detailing all sorts of issues, sometimes rumours, sometimes allegations. There is an ethics board, and my standard response has always been forward whatever you know and whatever conversation you want to relay to the ethics board. That is exactly what it is there for. That is exactly why I was one of the driving forces in the council behind the creation of the ethics board, and that is in large part why within the IAAF people were able to commit their concerns to the ethics board a long time before actually the ethics board were in a position to even confirm that they were investigating those allegations. That is absolutely the right and proper process.
Thank you. Yes, we'll just keep going along, Sean. And then we'll come over this side, sorry.
Sean Ingle, Guardian. How did your discussions today talk about the possibility of Russian athletes in the Russian system going to CAS? And is that a fear you have? Do you expect it to happen?
It's neither a fear nor an expectation. They have the right, as any athlete does, to challenge an adjudication in the court of arbitration. So that is, that is a potential.
Okay, this lady over here.
Amanda Davis from CNN. The statement here talks about the head coach of the Russian athletics team and the athletes that appear unwilling to acknowledge the nature and extent of the doping problems. How confident are you, given what you've said about the Russian sports ministry and above, that the right message is coming from the higher levels now?
What do you mean by the right message coming from the high level?
You mentioned is there pressure from above still on the Russian athletes and the coaches to be doing this?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, what we have received from the ministry and higher, we have read in the newspapers, just like you have. The commitment formally from the ministry has been great. Formally, it's been we've been told that there is full commitment from Minister Mutko, there is full commitment from the Russian Olympic Committee, there is full commitment from the Russian anti-doping system. What we have spent very much of our time to do is to corroborate information that we receive from many sources inside of Russia, but also outside of Russia, in order to collect all this into our report. So we've been trying to get as much evidence, information as possible in order to conclude like we've done. But the reference to the coach and the athletes is something we experienced directly, because we last month went to Moscow and interviewed the head coach and interviewed clean athletes and athletes that had been doping, had accepted doping bans. And that is based on those interviews that we are making this part of the report. Well, we're back to the culture again, the deep-rooted culture of doping, I think, and that's the only explanation I can give, because there was, in order to fix a problem, you have to realize and accept and acknowledge that there is a problem, and if you don't do that, and if you say that everything is fine, how can you move forward? So I think that's the first step that needs to be undertaken by Russia, is to acknowledge that there is a problem in all parts of government level and sports level, and then we can move forward.
Okay, down the front, Franco, and then, yes, I will come over.
President Seb, after this decision, are you not worried about the level of athletics competition, the Olympic program, without the Russian team? What is your feeling now?
Well, I mean, I think it's fairly obvious when I say that I want to see as many countries competing in the Olympic Games, but our objective is not actually to sit there feeling good that we've got as many countries as we possibly can to an Olympic Games. My responsibility as president of this federation is to make sure that we get as many clean athletes as we possibly can to an Olympic Games, and that has to be the guiding principle. I absolutely firmly believe that it was the guiding principle for every one of my colleagues that unanimously accepted these recommendations sitting around the table today, and that has to be the objective. Look, you know, it was not an easy decision to make today, because, you know, there are many of us sitting around that table who have competed at the very highest level. And there are many sitting around that table who have coached at the very highest level or had really serious and senior roles in the administration of our sport. We are all sitting there because we are passionate about our sport. This is a sad day for anybody concerned. Whichever decision was made today was going to be a sad day for our sport. So yes, there is a humanity here that, you know, that tells you very simply that this was not an easy decision nor lightly taken.
Okay, yes.
Yes, Brian Pinelli, Around the Rings for both Seb and Rune. Rune, in addition to obviously your 5 months of hard work with the task force, observing and gathering, how much did Wednesday's latest report by WADA about Russian athletes, ducking and avoiding tests, coming up with excuses, one situation even that they had an athlete concealed a container of clean urine. How much was that discussed today, and how much did it go into the decision? And lastly, how alarming is it that this isn't just, doping positives, this is a collapse of the entire system? Thanks.
The WADA report that was posted, I think, on Wednesday was an update from a report that WADA Director Rob Keeler did at the WADA Executive and Foundation Committee meeting in May last month. So this was an update. We have had a close and do have a close cooperation with WADA in exchange of information on Russia, because WADA also have a cooperation and are trying to get RUSADA up and running. So we were fully aware of it. Of course, we take that into consideration. It wasn't discussed today because today was the conclusions, and the conclusions are based on this type of information, but also many other parts of information that, as I mentioned earlier, we have received.
And are you okay with the second part, the breakdown of the system?
Just
how alarming is it?
That's a general question, I think, on how alarming it is. It is alarming that a system is failing to comply with the rules that has been adopted around the world. You have the World Anti-Doping Code, which is the rules applying to all sports organizations, all national anti-doping organizations. And if those rules are not followed, the clean athletes will suffer because they will not be in accordance with the same system, applicable to the same system. And that is a concern. It's a grave concern, not only for Russia, but of course for other sports, other countries as well, as I mentioned quite early in the press conference.
Okay, we've only got time for 3 more because Rooney has a flight to catch. So we're going to go over to this gentleman there, this gentleman here, and then Nick behind. Yeah. We will do some one-on-one. We'll do as many one-on-ones as we can.
Matt Slater, Press Association. A couple of questions for Lord Coe. Given what we learned yesterday about your close ties with Papa Musasa Diak, a man that a friend of yours, we now know, tried to warn you about via email and phone, have you considered your own position? If not, will you refer yourself to the Ethics Committee?
Look, it is the very nature of a campaign that advice is given whether it is sought or not. Some of it is useful, some of it less so. I had a campaign team who worked very closely with me on this campaign, and you treat information warily and civilly, but information and advice is not always accepted, and it's certainly not always sought.
Okay, gentlemen here, put your hand up. Higher, higher.
Hi, Takashi Tamura from Kyoto News. Question to the President. So first is Russian suspension. Did the allegation around Sochi and the WADA new report have an impact on your decisions? And the second question about German long jumper Markus Riem. So did you discuss about him?
You take that, I can take Markus.
On the Sochi issue, as I briefly mentioned earlier, we have taken that very seriously and taken that into consideration and discussed it in the task force when we have been, as I said, collating and corroborating all information that we do have. So it's been, of course, taken into consideration, and we take that very seriously.
On Markus Riem, the situation is actually not complicated. you know, he has to prove that the prosthetic that he uses does not give him competitive advantage. At this stage, he has not. He has, you know, we await research to show either way, and we continue to discuss this with him. But at this stage, he has not, you know, he has not been able to show that this does not create a competitive advantage.
Okay, last question with Nick, and then we'll do some TVs and then come back and talk to the written press.
Nick Butler from Inside the Games. Just to clarify, you said that athletes who've been tested under strong and effective systems are able to apply. Will those who failed drugs tests in the past and return to competition be automatically excluded from that? Thank you.
No, that's not part of the system. That's not part of the rule change. The rule change opens up if you have committed an anti-doping rule violation previously, that doesn't exclude you. If you're served your ban, you're eligible for applying under these conditions, as far as I can see from the rules. But I'm not a lawyer, so I take that this is the correct answer.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll do the one-on-ones. We'll come back and talk to the written press. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruna.
Buonasera, Franco. If you're not saying that last year, but I am not sure. Yeah, because even if he's quick enough.